Welcome everyone to Recovery Machine. My name's Nathan, joined by co-host Corey, who is back in action here in studio and ready to discuss my recent interviews.
Yeah. So first of all, well done on the 4 parts of the Street Views series.
Thank you.
It was strange. It was an interesting experience for me to be on the listening end. This was very much a solo effort because, as some of our listeners may know, you and I don't live within easy driving distance. So this was one that you took the reins on yourself and did independently. And it was just really interesting to be able to sit back and listen to it as a listener and as someone who has a little bit of an inside scoop on the work that you've been doing and who's been learning about Safe Supply along with you as we've been doing this show. So that was really wild, just to be able to sit back and listen and kind of formulate my own questions. And that's what we're going to do today, is just talk about, we thought it needed some reflection, needed some discussion after the fact to do what you did and have conversations with people who are receiving Safe Supply in our province. You occasionally will see that on the news, in like a news-friendly 30-second soundbite, but to be able to give people a bit of a platform and an opportunity to say what they want to say about Safe Supply and about their lives, I think is pretty cool, pretty special. So, and I thought you handled it really sensitively and courageously.
Thank you.
So I wanted to know, and I'm sure people want to know, what was that like for you? It's a very different type of interview to be doing. We haven't done anything where it's like, where you're kind of candidly approaching someone who hasn't prepared for the interview. What was it like?
Well, first off, I should say that I have an advantage in this type of work that I'm doing. I've taken a position just a couple months ago with a pharmacy that works closely with the Urban Outreach Program here in Kelowna. And it's a fantastic little independent pharmacy called Juniper. And it's run by a couple of individuals who are very experienced with this demographic. They're very experienced with the politics and just the technicalities of how things work that way. And so what it did was it's provided me with an opportunity to get to know some of these people who are very much on the outskirts. Most of them are living in shelters, and many of them are on opioid agonist therapy and a combined kind of take-home supply of usually dilaudid tablets that can be crushed, they can be injected, snorted, etc. So this position and the owners of the store graciously allowed me to, basically ask people, and I have built a relationship with some of these people. So it wasn't, I've tried this before where I just went randomly kind of into the street, and it didn't work out very well for a whole bunch of different reasons. I think it's important to be able to have some kind of, you need a little bit of trust. Like they have to see, people need to see that you're, I think it helps that I'm a pharmacist. I think it helps that they've seen my face and already talked to me. They know I'm not a cop. that helps tremendously. And what I was able to do there is basically, as people came into the store, I was able to ask them if they, had a few minutes. And then again, the store owners graciously allowed me to have a space that was quiet enough, secluded enough, so that, I could get some audio that was useful and could be presented in a way that could be understood. But there's been a lot of positive response from these interviews. I think some of the people who listened, it just kind of, it didn't land. But most of the people, I would say overwhelmingly, most of the people, it did land, and they actually appreciated the way it was done, because the lower quality audio, the setting, it sort of added a level of realism to it that you wouldn't get, like you said, in a news segment or something like that. So, and I wanted to go in doing my best to stay objective and to learn. I still ended up asking some leading questions, and that's something I'm going to have to work on, because I have certain ideas about how things should go, and the way you ask a question, of course, can significantly affect the answer that you receive. So I'll do a better job of that next time around, and I think as a team we can figure out a way of doing this a little bit better. But it was a good first go around, and I was happy with it. I kept the questions fairly straightforward so that I could get responses that would advance not just my understanding of what these people are dealing with when they're living in a shelter, or trying to match a fentanyl dose with what we're offering as safe supply. So I learned quite a bit. I learned more than I thought, and some of the responses we're definitely going to have to do more to get more of a feel of it. But I was able to connect, especially with the Street View number 4, that younger guy. I mean, Jesus, I think, I mean, there is something in him that is very special. Like I believe that if his circumstances were different, I think what you're looking at there is probably like a talented artist of some kind. He's got a creative mind that, like, you can just see it trying to, like, he's trying to fight through this, the haze, first of all, of the heavy dose of drugs that he's under, but then also learning disabilities that are not being, it's hard to address properly when you're on that level of opiates. But I mean, I learned a lot, and there's a few things that I wanted to run past you, and so I think this will be good. We'll just kind of go over things and discuss it point by point.
Yep. And then I have some more questions for you, or at least things to talk about, but let's go for it.
Okay. Sounds good. So the first thing that I thought was really interesting with the first interview was this was an opportunity with somebody who was not on a significantly comparably high dose of narcotics or any kind of, like, he was on opiates, but as you could tell probably from the interview, his cognition he was very much there, and his story is interesting. I mean, the having your daughter die from a fentanyl overdose, and then deciding in your sorrow and grief that you're going to follow her by doing fentanyl in an attempt to understand what she was doing and also possibly take your own life. I thought that was, I mean, I've never heard such a thing before. What did you think of that statement?
Yeah. Well, and like you said, he right off the bat, after listening to all 4 of them, he struck me as being like the most composed, or most what we would think of as like socially normative, right? In terms of how he conducted the dialogue. Yet that's such a unbelievably heavy thing to admit to and to say.
Keep in mind, I mean, I just basically tapped this guy on the shoulder and was like, "Hey, do you have 5 minutes?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure, let's talk." So it's not like this guy, we just sat down. He knows me a little, but he was willing to just, I mean, that's quite a vulnerable statement to make, and very impressive. Also the other insights he had, but
it's a testament to how little we know about people's stories when we pass judgment, like in passing.
Right.
What's actually going on with someone, what's actually motivating someone. I don't think anyone would take a wild guess that would be someone's story, that they made some deliberate choices to understand their child and the loss of their child. Grief is such a powerful thing. In a meeting this week, I was talking about how grief and recovery have such similarities, and we don't have to get into all of that, but I think that they do. and grief and addiction, there's a relationship there too, for sure.
Oh, hand in hand. Yeah.
The other thing that was so interesting about this individual was his, and we'll get into it a little bit more in our discussion, I'm assuming, about mandatory treatment, is that he was very much at the same time in favor of mandatory treatment. And his answer to that, given his life experience, it was kind of surprising to me.
I thought so as well, but it made me think, and I need to think about this a little more. And I mean, I did pose that question throughout the series of interviews and received different answers, but some of which, again, I think, especially towards the end there, I think I posed in a way that was very leading. But, and I've discussed it since with my significant other, who's a doctor, and her feelings towards patients sometimes is that her belief is that it's not always the drugs, it's not always even the mental health issues. It's actually more, in many cases, a developmental issue where you could see, and I really see this now, where it's almost like some people have made it to a certain level where it might be, it could be 11. Let's say they're operating at the level of an 11-year-old, emotionally and intellectually, and that's if you took the drugs away, and with, yeah, maybe there is some mental health issues on top of that or whatever, but if you set those things aside, those developmental issues really do have a huge impact on that individual's ability to make good decisions, regardless of the circumstances that they're in. And this becomes an ethics problem that could be argued forever, I think. But it does make me think. And when he was talking about how some people are just never going to get out without some kind of significant, it has to be more than hand holding almost. And like my statement towards the end was, and this is how I feel about it, is that personally, for me as an individual, I would rather die than be forced into a program like that against my, I consider it a personal human rights violation in many ways, not just to be subjected to mandatory treatment, but also that there's a paternal entity that's telling me what I can and can't do with my body. Mm-hmm. I have several issues with that, but that's me, and there's all sorts of different people out there. So I mean, I'm still digesting that. What were your thoughts after that response?
It definitely got me thinking about it as well. And then in part 3, I got thinking about it more because the lady you spoke to had an opposing view to mandatory treatment, which has been much more similar to my view, is that people need to be ready. There needs to be some will and motivation, or something has to click.
And she has experience, like she has not just personal experience, but she has worked in several facilities and seen what happens when, and we know what the data says too. So that point, I think, is solid. Like your chances of having a successful experience in treatment, those chances go way down. It looks like, if you are forced into it. That seems to be the case. So I think we can agree on that, but please go on.
Yeah, totally agree on that. I think what it highlighted for me is the difference between whether or not you think some people will never be ready or never be willing to step into it or make a change. And so if you believe in mandatory treatment, the other question is do we have any faith in the systems that are in place, or in the policymakers that are in place, or the options that we have, that treatment, that mandatory treatment would even be effective, or would offer people what they needed? Those are two different discussions. Whether or not someone, will never be ready, as long as they're using, they'll always avoid getting help or always avoid making the change, or maybe something will click and they will be ready. But if they are ready, or if their hand is forced, what is the system that they're going to walk into? Will it be as dysfunctional as some of the things that we have seen firsthand? Will it be as dysfunctional as we know some of the treatment programs that are a revolving door in North America, where there's profits to be had, where there are where it's a 12-step model and the person doesn't subscribe to that 12-step model? I mean, and that's just 5% of the issues that may come up that could make it an unsuccessful program. So I think for me, it highlighted the fact that, well, even if for some people forcing their hand, if it was a good thing, I don't have any confidence that the system would be there to receive them in a holistic, healthy, productive way.
Yeah, that's the same conclusion I was forced to come to as well, and it was the first hurdle. I mean, let's say, like you said, we're going to get on board with this, and so you somehow have to make a decision that so we're going to have a team of individuals. It's the same as throwing somebody in jail. There has to be a judge and a jury, people who we feel as a society are qualified to make that decision, to take that person's rights and autonomy away. Now, let's say we go back to the person who this might be, if you look at forced treatment as an option, it might be an option for people who are they don't appear to have any chance of making it on their own. They don't have the tools, they don't have the resources. They just never had the hand they got dealt in life. It was too difficult to play. And so we decide somehow we're going to put together a team to do that. That's hard enough. So you do that, you take this person's autonomy away, and then you're right. I mean, I have no faith that there's any program right now outside of we would have to basically commit social resources on an epic scale. And what you're essentially doing at that point is your handholding. You're going to have to handhold, and you're going to have to assign somebody basically to help this person probably forever, because if they lacked the developmental ability to choose to try a different route, like maybe try detox to treatment, then what are their chances if you force them to go to treatment and they get out on the other side? I mean, how many of those people are going to relapse within a week? And how much more dangerous have you made that relapse, really? So it's such a tough call to make, and I think it would be a lot easier if we had facilities, and let's say we had facilities that were 25% successful. And I don't mean at keeping people sober for a year, like many of them. That's what they claim their success rate is. That if you abstain from mood altering substances for a year, they call that a success. I'm talking about these people turning their life around, so that a lot of times this is going to mean learning how to live without drugs, learning how to cope in society, stress management, emotional regulation, job skills, the list goes on and on. So I don't know, man. Monumental. That would be a monumental undertaking.
Yeah. The other observation, and I was going to preface it by saying, I don't want to sound like I'm bashing 12-step, and we're not, and I don't think that we do, but we have just challenged it at times on our show. But if you do subscribe to that idea that we are powerless, then the mandatory treatment model becomes much more reasonable, I think. And it's just interesting that individual who was supportive of it was also supportive of the 12-step model.
Yes.
And I think there is a correlation there. If you polled people who had lived experience with addiction and recovery, and for those who had experienced recovery and had done it via 12-step, I bet you they might be more supportive generally than those who weren't 12-step people.
Yep, that's where my money would go there as well.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of the crux of it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you believe in these concepts like rock bottom and powerlessness, which we do not,
Right.
that's all. I mean, but I think there's something to be said for 12 steps, because there is obviously there's a portion of our society that leaves that they fit the criteria for that paradigm to work for them.
Yeah.
And that's great. I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The problem, I guess, is the one that we've been facing in Canada for a long time, and much more so in the States, where that paradigm has become intertwined with not just the medical approach to this problem, but also the legal approach to this problem. I mean, in the States, they're not messing around with mandatory treatment. It's just they give you a deal you can't refuse. You're 10 years in prison or it's 18 months at a Bible camp or whatever, right? Like, I mean, so, and I don't think that would exist without the, the historical, the precedent set by the 12-step model, I guess.
For sure. Now, I know we weren't planning on going through it episode by episode, but can we lead that into part 2?
Of course, we can do whatever we want, because this is our show.
Just because it just got me thinking chronologically about it, and then I got thinking about, as we were talking here, about the individual in part 2, who, one of the most fascinating individuals I've heard speak about this in a long time, as well, as someone who is living completely off the grid. I can't recall how many years they said that they had been living off the grid. A very long time.
Yeah. No ID, no credit cards, just a cash only existence, I guess. And pretty interesting. I mean, I like her story about being downtown East Side and how, being approached by a Buddhist monk and all that. And I thought it was really interesting how it kind of lines up with a lot of Buddhism. Like if you just set the drugs aside for a little bit, I mean, Jesus would kind of be, if you look, or the Buddha would kind of be in that subset of people, right? He'd just be completely uninterested in material possessions and only there to help people.
What they reminded me of was Jack Kerouac, who is probably my favorite, like all-time favorite author, or favorite kind of classic American author, and was in all of his writing was very much promoting his, or grappling with Buddhism and grappling with a simple life that was free of possessions and free of love and just striving for simplicity, but was also a tormented soul, was also full of pain and trauma, and was an alcoholic. And Kerouac was, as with each book that he wrote, his alcoholism and his substance use became much more obvious. But my favorite of his books is The Dharma Bums, where he's really discovering Buddhism and drinking a lot. And he goes off into the Cascade Mountains of Washington State and to live in isolation as a fire watcher. And that individual, that was kind of where I went with it, because I thought this is, and Kerouac got romanticized as being like this, this founder of this movement of writers and a cultural movement. But then you've got someone who's present day, and it looks a little bit different, and it looks like there's a lot more grit to it than what we romanticize.
Well, yeah, and it's not an easy life by any means.
No.
Not that if you're a Buddhist and you're trying to follow the eightfold path, I think that is a very difficult task on its own. It is interesting though, because there's been a few different kind of influential people that I could think of over the years who have very much been involved, been an active participant in Buddhism, and also had either a tremendous drug issue or a problem with alcohol at the same time.
Yeah, and it's like, to me, it kind of makes sense, like that just because you are living amidst chaos or living amidst substance use or other individuals who are using substance and or living off the grid, that you wouldn't be seeking out or feel desirous of having some serenity and some
Right.
peace.
Yeah. Like Alan Watts comes to mind,
For sure.
right?
For
I
sure.
mean, here's a guy who, a brilliant, charismatic, he had many followers. He had his own interesting hybrid philosophy
Mm-hmm.
that was heavily influenced by Buddhism. But he effectively, I don't know if this is true or not. There's some debate about the authenticity of how he died and everything, but it's believed that he ended up drinking himself to death.
Mm-hmm.
But before, he was confronted about that several times, and he was like, he said, "This is my life. It's my decision. This is what I'm interested in doing, and basically that's it."
Yeah.
So yeah, he had some quote about, I think he died in his 50s, early 50s, something like that, and he had some quote about being, yeah, this is a good time. It's a good time.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've done what I needed to do here, and I'm happy with where I've got to, and I think it's a good time. And he just shortly after that he died. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Interesting.
But I also thought, and this is just more of an observation, what a vulnerable individual. Obviously, a resilient individual and a survivor, but
Yeah.
but very vulnerable and very
Yeah.
much talk. I mean, the epitome of someone who's on the margins of our society in every which way, virtually.
Absolutely. Yeah. What did you think about? Like, were you aware of the term farming or being farmed?
I was aware. I've not heard that term, but I was aware of the action
Okay.
that people. And for anyone who missed that in your episode, it was the idea that someone ODs or someone is down from their substance, and then people come and lift their possessions off them and steal from them.
Yeah. Well, they were in these interviews, and I've talked to some people outside of these interviews to get a more candid kind of understanding of it. But there's a name for these individuals that I haven't heard yet. There's an actual slang term for them, but they are actual predators who, from what I understand, they'll have two different supplies of drugs. So they'll be selling down, and which is usually, it might be called heroin, but of course, almost all heroin now is fentanyl.
Yeah.
But the benzo dope, the fentanyl that's mixed with benzos and lanacane and all sorts of different stuff that they're putting in there, they have developed a skill set where they'll have their clientele that they normally sell to, and then when they see somebody that's particularly vulnerable and may have something like some valuables, they will sell them the other kind of fentanyl,
Mm-hmm.
and then they'll just hang out with them for a little bit. Maybe they'll both use the drug at the same time. The person who gets the extra strong fentanyl that's got the benzos in or whatever nods off in such a way that they're not only unconscious, but because of the benzos, there's an amnesia.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can barely recall what happened with the amount of that cocktail. And I was talking to, it was interesting, the day after I did these interviews, in the alley right next to our store, one of our clients got farmed right down till they took her panties and her bra. She was completely naked, laying in an alley.
Mm-hmm.
That's how she woke up that morning. And it was, I said, well, what was the last thing you remember? And she said, there's this guy, and there was an exchange that happened for drugs, and all I can remember is I started to nod off, and I had this blurred kind of. I thought that maybe he was going through my things, and then I don't remember anything. So the idea that there's actual professional farmers out there who are going around and actually preying on people, and usually they'll take everything. They won't take all your clothes. So I don't know what happened there. I don't want to know, but it's when I first started working at the store, I was like, how on earth can these people who are living in the shelter possibly function? Because I think 2 weeks is like the longest anyone ever keeps a phone. And even in the shelter, you're getting robbed all the time. When you're on the street, I mean, I've been there, almost 2 months now. And I know people who have been robbed of all their possessions 3 times in that time.
Wow.
Like, so imagine having your ID, like just everything taken. It's your shoes even sometimes. And sometimes apparently your entire clothes and the whole works. But to add that on top of the challenges that you're facing already, it's hard to wrap the mind around. But judging by the number of people I see losing their possessions, I think that the gentleman who was talking about this as something that happens often and is currently happening more often than ever, I think he's right. I think this is very prevalent right now.
Yeah. And I would imagine it makes me think that the idea of what happened in Vancouver this past spring of tearing apart these camps and isolating people and sending them out, breaking apart what small communities they have where they might be linked up with some people that are keeping them safe in some way or another. That makes people even more vulnerable to something like this, where if they are isolated, if they don't have some kind of a safety net of someone who's going to watch their back, that's just horrific though.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You cannot be on your own.
No.
You just won't make it. You need, most of the time, not most, but many times, the people who you think are your friends will also rob you, and so it's you got to work hard to find a community that you can trust. And then, when you get that community broken up, you got to start from scratch again, which means you're probably going to take a tremendous beating to get back to where you were. So that's definitely part of it as well. There was also some confirmation about I mean, I don't know, again, the authenticity of the numbers, but we know that some of this safe supply is getting sold. And then that money is being used to purchase more powerful street drugs. So the thing I need to dig into more and would be good to have more information on is how much of that is going on.
Yeah.
Because I think if this model of safe supply that we're doing right now, that does have, one of the problems with it is that we don't have the drugs that we manufacture right now are not cutting it, as far as they're not concentrated enough, they're not strong enough, they don't, I think even the heroin injection program that we have here, maybe that is what it would take, but that's something where you got to show up 3 times a day. You're asking too much right there. So I don't know, man. Like, even if we bring this current model with the current supplies and equipment that's being used, the medications that we've chosen, even if we bring it up to 100%, it still might not work, because fentanyl is so fucking powerful.
Yeah.
And man, what do we, what's the answer to that, Corey? What do we do about, how do we match this? Do we need to come up with new pharmaceuticals that are, a safe supply, but or maybe we just need to provide fentanyl in the same form, only pharmaceutically approved,
What about that? What
What
about that
about
idea?
that? Yeah. Seeing what I'm seeing and the ridiculous amount of, like, for one thing, I don't know if it's possible to counter fentanyl with a safe supply of oral anything.
Right.
I just don't know if that's going to work. I mean, we are maxed out as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I don't know how much more. The thing about taking drugs orally is they go through something called first pass metabolism, which means that they go through the portal vein of your liver, they get processed, and then they get recirculated.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a different way of taking drugs than if you use something that's, say through the skin or a needle.
Mm-hmm.
Both those methods bypass first pass metabolism. That's where you get your, that spike. So that the real high that people are after is usually from, getting around the oral route, or like nasally, that'll work, or smoking will do it too. But I mean, maybe that would be more realistic, providing a fentanyl product that can be smoked and injected, and very much regulated on the dose. I don't know, man.
That's an interesting idea. I think there will have to be a creative look at that, and I don't think we can judge the route that people are going to use their drug to get them through right now, and then also expect them to kind of just use the safe supply, just use it orally, just use it as we say. It might, for some individuals, it might take more than that. So yeah, maybe what you're saying is the most reasonable option. Because yeah, like you said, we're up against a huge beast in fentanyl right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get comments all the time on Facebook about, one of the most common ones is we got to go after the dealers. We got to go after the dealers. We got to death sentences for dealers. There's a bunch of problems with that. Spend some time looking into the research that's been done on maximizing prison sentences and even capital punishment. There's, I think, 33 countries in the world who have capital punishment for drug offenses. It does nothing. It does nothing to curb addiction. It does nothing to curb the importing and exporting of drugs.
No.
So your first problem is that no matter how severe you make the punishment, right up until death, it does not stop the problem. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of an issue. We've got China supplying, I think they're still supplying 90% of either, ready to go fentanyl and pressed tablets, or fentanyl precursors, or fentanyl powder. That's going to Mexico. Some of the precursors are coming up from India. So there's these outside countries that's where most of these products are coming. And I mean, for God's sake, like, if you're able to get a kilogram of pure fentanyl into the United States, you've just made yourself a tremendous amount of money.
Yeah.
And a kilogram can be shipped in the mail, folks. Like, how do you, I mean, I was thinking about it last night. Outside of, okay, let's say Canada just went wild. We're going to flip out. Anybody caught with anything that's got fentanyl, you're getting executed immediately. Any country suspected of importing or exporting fentanyl products or precursors to Canada, we're going to war. We're going to war right now, and we're going to take our 3 F-18s from 1994. We're going to fly them over there, and we're going to start attacking you. And Canada can't do shit against these. We don't have the clout, the numbers, the military. We don't have what it takes to deal with that problem at all. The only ones who could if you want to take it to that level, and your idea is to stop the dealer, then I think realistically what you're talking about is a full-scale war. And that means that the US would have to declare that for India, China, and Mexico, they're going to trace back the source. They're going to, if their governments cannot get control of this problem within whatever time frame they give them, then they're sending over the entire force of their military, and they're carpet bombing any area suspected. Like that's what it would take, I think, to actually maybe slow this problem using that kind of an approach.
Yeah. And the other thing is like the low level dealers, the people who are dealing on a street or in a community level, are also in many cases people who are marginalized themselves or who are struggling themselves.
Almost most the street level dealers are supporting their own habit. That's all they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So kill them if you want. It's not going to make a goddamn difference.
No.
Yeah.
Should we talk about number 3?
Yeah, she's a fantastic lady. My God.
This one, Street Views number 3, was probably my favorite. I listened to it twice in a row, just like it, and it was, I think, the longest one, but I had to give it 2 full listens back to back.
Mm-hmm.
I thought she was outstanding, and just it was a painful conversation. I found it to be it was the one that made me feel the most sad. Or at least it brought out the most feeling in me. What a tough life. What a lot of pain and trauma she had been through. Being through domestic violence, being through all of these fractured relationships. And I think she had a really remarkable perspective on what some things that make a difference in recovery and to the people who are experiencing addiction or homelessness. I thought she was just remarkable.
Yeah.
What was it like to talk to her?
Well, again, here's a lady where, I after talking to her, I could say this was somebody who at one time was probably living in a big house in suburbia with a family, and very normal by most standards, at least from an outside point of view. She could be your neighbor. She could, this. So she had that going on. She was living that kind of a life, and then is now living in a shelter. And to me, that is a lot different than some of the younger people who live there, because they may have lived in that kind of a neighborhood when they were young, and maybe their parents threw them out early or whatever. But she had the whole kind of white picket fence thing going on, minus what sounds like sounds like her husband was a shitty person or whatever. But I could see that in her. Like she's obviously an intelligent lady, and just to know that, like, I've been to Cornerstone, I know what it's like in there, and to be a woman in there, I think would be just. I can't. I have no reference point to wrap my mind around what that would be like. I can think of what it would be like for myself to be in there, and Jesus, I would not be comfortable. I can tell you that. And it's not because it's just. It is a very unpredictable environment, and most people are, doing their best to keep their shit together, but things happen, and it's the nature of these shelters. Sometimes that you're going to have, you're dealing with people who have, unmedicated mental illness, all sorts of different issues.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of her trying to exist and stay safe in that environment, and yet she maintains a level of dignity and optimism. That she doesn't have to, like, she could say fucking, she could be complaining her ass off every day, but she doesn't. She comes in and she makes an effort to, she's polite, she's she's a thoughtful lady, and she was a pleasure to talk to. And her story did make me pretty sad, and unfortunately the part about for mothers having their children taken away. Oh my God, it's there are so many people, so many women who are living with that kind of whatever you want to call it under those circumstances, I guess. And many of them, like I talked to a lady the other day who she hasn't even talked to her children in 2 years, and they live in the same city. Like, I mean, what must that be like?
Yeah, and so, and this is what I had wanted to talk about with this episode as well. Was she was someone who opposed the idea of mandatory treatment. She was critical of that notion, and she got talking about the fractured relationship with her kids, and she'd had that experience of losing her kids or losing custody, and then having this fractured relationship, and the pain of that for her that I can't even begin to understand.
No, yeah.
But then you think, okay, let's suppose that she specifically got put into a situation of mandatory treatment. Is the system going to do anything about remedying or helping her with that fractured relationship? Maybe she'll get some counseling. Maybe there will be some social workers in place, or there's some work to help aid in that process of healing those relationships. But like, that is such a probably powerful stressor for her and driver, that if we don't look at that, if we don't tailor treatment to the individual's needs and the individual's traumas and what is at the root there for them, then forget it. I don't think we stand a chance of actually helping.
Well, I can tell you that I've talked to a couple of these ladies who've lost custody of their children. And the drugs, like, I think the lady, the third lady I interviewed there, I think she said that she's put everything she can into her system and it's still not enough.
Yeah.
I believe her. And I believe that for these women who have lost their children, there will be I can see no way out of drugs for them. Absolutely 0% chance of getting away from drugs until there's some hope that they can remedy that relationship. Because that losing their children is so painful that they can be on, they can take a dose that would kill an elephant, and tears will still be streaming down their eyes when they talk about it.
Yeah.
There's nothing, the power of that desire and the love for their children. I mean, we know it's one of the most significant factors in recovery is having children in the first place as a motivator. But
and she had said that she lost the relationship with her children due to her relapses. Those were her words. And I also thought, like, I can't imagine how her kids must have felt. Like, this is how complex of an issue it is when we, as a society, pass judgment and stuff. And because it's probably not just the relapses, there's probably a whole bunch of other complicated stuff in that relationship that made them say enough's enough.
Sure.
And I don't want to be hard on them without knowing the shit that they've probably seen and experienced too. But that loss of a relationship and that loss of connection, we know it's a fact that is a huge driver.
Also, the way that some of these individuals describe themselves, these moms especially who've lost their children, the guilt and shame they feel over that. Like, I mean, I'm a piece of shit. That's why I can't see my children, because I'm a fucking junkie piece of shit who lives on the street. So imagine that's the rhetoric playing in your mind. And then you're gonna try to get off drugs.
Yeah.
Fucking forget it. It's not gonna happen. Not gonna happen.
Yeah.
So I mean, that was an interesting kind of look at the significance of that particular problem.
Yeah. So again, it just made me think, like, to the policymakers who think that this will be a successful idea. without looking at complex things like that, like parent-child relationships in that context, oh man, we don't have any idea. Or they don't. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know, man. There's a couple times I had to go home and think, and after I did these interviews, and I think if it wasn't for the last one there, because I was thinking to myself, we're wasting our fucking time. That we're not going to win. This is it. People are just going to keep dying. It doesn't matter what we do. There's no outside of, like I said, all out war with these groups who are, you know, and I was kind of, there was an attitude. I was being kind of like, fuck, I kind of want to give up. Like, I don't want to think about this anymore. And then I talked to the last guy there, and I know that he had just, well, I don't know, but I suspect that he had kind of topped up just before he came in.
Mm-hmm.
And I could have not, I could have prevented that, but I made the decision to allow that to happen because I wanted him to be comfortable enough to do this, because I knew it was going to be hard for him. But what was most miraculous about that experience for me is that through the haze of, you know, whatever he had on board, we were able to, there was a moment during that interview where there was a real human connection there. And it wasn't just some, you know, you can tell when you're discussing something. And when I looked at him, and he was wearing sunglasses, and at one point I could just see like a couple lines of tears coming down, and I gave him an out on that question about, you know, what he wanted people to know about what it was like being him, and he could have easily just left it at that, but he didn't. And he's like, you know, I forget what he said, like, no, man, I like it. I want to answer this. And he was, through the haze, through everything, through his whatever kind of shit he had going on in the day, he was using every cylinder he had to work on that question. He was really thinking about it. And to me, that was, I was really humbled by his response to that, to the effort he was putting in to articulate a thoughtful answer, knowing how difficult it was for him to do so under those circumstances.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, well, there's got to be a solution. You know, we got to find a way. We got to do something, because we can't have these, like, I don't know how old he is, 21, 22. I don't want that kid to die, man. I don't want it. He doesn't want to, you know, he doesn't like the situation he's in. He wants out. You know, it's just, fuck, it's hard. And then, yeah, I just, that one really, that really impacted me.
I thought that was such a lovely moment. One of the most lovely moments we've had on this whole show. Like, to me, that's a question that doesn't get asked to individuals who are experiencing homelessness and addiction enough. Like that question of, what do you want people to know about you? And you weren't asking him what has hurt you the most. You weren't asking, you know, what have you been through? But that question kind of conjures so much up, because I think a level of understanding, you know, the desire to be understood is sure there for these individuals, for every individual, for everyone.
For everyone. Absolutely, everyone. And for this particular population of people who are living on the outskirts of our society, it takes so little to, I mean, just just treating someone, with respect and kindness, just like you would anyone else,
Yeah.
means a lot to somebody who's living under those circumstances. And to give an individual an opportunity to express themselves in that way, I think there's power in that. Because most of the time, a lot of these people are focused on survival, really.
Mm-hmm.
Where am I? I got to do this to, if you ask them what the hardest thing, most of them will respond, the hardest thing is like not being dope sick.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the constant battle is trying to secure a supply. So you don't often have an opportunity to reflect, really, even, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
you're either up, you're either down, or you're hunting.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And if you're having a difficult day, either difficult day at work or on the street or whatever you're doing, and you're using a substance to cope with that difficulty, to cope with that emotional difficulty, the stress, the anxiety, whatever it may be, the rhetoric, and then you can hear it in that episode where you ask that question, and it's almost like poking through a cloud of smoke, or like just sort of parting that.
mm-hmm.
And there's this perception, to me, one of the most derogatory things I hear or read in the comment sections online is the idea that people like these people that you talk to are zombies. I've heard that term.
Yeah.
And this dehumanizing language.
Mm-hmm.
And you hear when someone is asked, what do you want people to know about you? And it generates that level of an emotional response, or that much pause. You could feel it parting that cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Remarkable. And just imagine if that was something that was more incorporated into our society as a whole, just like asking that question.
Yeah.
The guy who's having road rage or freaking out in the grocery store or something like that. Like if someone just said, like, what's going on? What do you want us to know about you right now?
Yeah. What? Because I mean, it's obviously all the stuff that came before in that person's day that led to the road rage or whatever. I mean, that's almost always the case, but
yeah.
But yeah, it really does come down to that, doesn't it? It's like people want just the tiniest of an opportunity to express themselves to the world in a way that somehow, hopefully, makes people understand a little bit more about where they're coming from, what their circumstances are, and who they are as a person, mm-hmm. as an individual. It's yeah.
And I don't. And to me, this is one of we've talked about it when we were talking about our explaining safe supply, or the benefits of safe supply being that it establishes a relationship or a connection with a healthcare team, with a group of people who are providing a service. It's building trust. It's building safety to come back and know that when I come into that pharmacy to get my meds, Nathan will be there. And maybe if I'm having a shitty day or really struggling, maybe I can tell him something that I need to tell him, or he'll ask the right question. And I think it's good to remember, or when I think back to when I was working in the ER, or what I would want to say to you as someone who's working with safe supply, is that, like, that doesn't have to be an endpoint. Like, that is already a success. If we're making that kind of a connection with someone, that's already a win. The win doesn't have to be the end result of them either getting clean and hopefully surviving, or the negative outcome of them dying. The win is happening in those moments each time.
That's a great point. Yeah. Too many people are focused on, well, for one thing, there seems to be a big misunderstanding about the focus of safe supply. People seem to think that it's somehow related to getting the person off of drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't understand that it's the point of safe supply is to keep that person alive.
Mhm.
so that they can go on to make more decisions for better or for worse. That's
Yeah.
it. That's where the program ends. So I'm trying to explain that to people online, and I tell you, it's an uphill battle.
Mhm.
They think safe supply is some kind of a weird magic trick that is somehow going to get people off of drugs. It's not. It might help. Well, it certainly would help if somebody was motivated to lower their dose through a taper. I mean,
Sure.
if you gave people access to like correctly dosed fentanyl, and they had a unlimited supply, and they wanted to come off it, then they could taper themselves off. I know that can be done because I've done it myself, not off of fentanyl, but I've tapered myself off of oxycodone,
Mhm.
and I know that's like these days that's like a Tylenol 3 in comparison to what the fuck
Yeah.
is out there now. But yeah, I don't know, man. I mean that was the other thing I think over the last little while here. The other thing that's really being brought home for me is the overwhelming power of this substance. How
Mm.
different, how monumentally significantly more powerful fentanyl is than anything else that we've faced before.
Mhm.
It's just I didn't understand, when I see the safe supply program trying to counter or at least, provide some relief from withdrawal and the doses I'm seeing, I just couldn't. I was shocked. I was
Yeah.
absolutely shocked. And then when I talk to people about what they require to get through the day, I'm like, holy shit.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how to put this in perspective for people, but I would have thought that's like there is a general understanding about opioids that if you continue to slowly increase the dose, generally there's no ceiling based on genetics. Eventually, you'll get to a point where your respiratory system starts to fail, and that might kill you. But you can actually go a lot higher with some of these, especially the
Mhm.
pharmaceutical doses, than people would believe. But the fentanyl doses that people are ingesting right now, I can't, I cannot believe that and they're functional. Some of them are functional and quite coherent. Like they're
Mhm.
walking around, you wouldn't be able to tell this person is on enough heavy opiate to, I mean, if you gave some of these doses to the biggest guy you could find, I mean, they're going to hit the deck, and you're going to
Yeah.
be Narcan and using Narcan after Narcan trying to bring him back.
Mhm. Mhm.
And yeah, I don't know. That's the other thing. Narcan is almost not cutting it anymore.
Yeah.
Each resuscitation is taking more and more and more and more. We need better weapons.
Yep.
Yeah,
And all the while you don't know if there's a benzo in there.
yeah. You don't know
And if
there's a
there is, then the
benzo.
Narcan won't work anyway, even if if it's a reasonable or lower dose of an opioid.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a benzo in there, you need an X8, right? So
I'm going to pose a question to you here before we wrap this up,
okay.
and it's something that I've been thinking about. It's controversial, let's say, but you know how we have do not resuscitate orders that you could sign when you're in the hospital and you're in rough shape. I'm not advocating for this, but I'm thinking in some cases, I'm posing the question, is it reasonable if the person has significant, if their faculties are there and they've got, they're with it enough to make a decision of this magnitude, should we be allowing these people to actually sign basically no Narcan, like I'm sick of this type thing? What do you think
Oh
about that?
man, that's an interesting question. And this is in the context in our province and in our country with medically assisted dying
Yeah,
being a thing.
the states already thinks we're barbarians.
Yeah.
because of medically assisted dying. Like I hear you see the stories down there in the news. Canada allows 15-year-old to die via their medically, which is total bullshit. To qualify for MAID requires all sorts of different things. It's a very complex process, but I mean, for God's sake, have some empathy. If you were living in pain that was like an 8 out of 10 your whole life, what the fuck kind of life is that? You want to keep going? Right. No, you don't. So I see some people who are in so much pain, they are in such rough shape, and they're being Narcaned weekly. You know, are we helping that person? That's the question.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think the conversations that you had these last episodes and many other examples that we know tells me that individuals can still be competent decision makers in many ways. If you are using a substance or addicted to a substance, that doesn't mean that you're not a competent decision maker.
Not at all. Yeah, I would say that, I don't know, 80% of the people I see out there could make that decision. Mm-hmm. I would respect their decision either way.
Mm-hmm. And in having that conversation, it tips the idea of addiction as a disease it tips it more towards addiction as a disease, because if we are comfortable with someone with a chronic illness saying, do not resuscitate. If I have heart failure or some sort of terminal illness and I say, do not resuscitate, even if I'm not imminently going to die, even if this is something that maybe further down the road, but we're able to sign those papers, then I don't see why not. I don't see why that couldn't be at least a conversation.
Right. I don't know how you pose that conversation, and maybe that is an interview question that would be very interesting to ask this demographic.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tough one, man, because I think both of us personally have been in a spot where we may have said, fuck it, I want to die. Right?
Or where you don't care like you would once you're out of it.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's very, very tough kind of thing to ponder. But if we're talking about real autonomy here and dealing with this problem on I guess the concern I have is that at this rate, I don't know what to do other than, like we've talked about half measures, we've talked about quarter measures. Mm-hmm. I don't see a politician having the even the power to do what's necessary here, as far as trying to set up a program where you would be able to access a potent, like actually fentanyl or something that was in a controlled dose that you knew wasn't going to kill you. I mean, man, it's such a complex problem. It's so hard. We've looked at it from many angles, and Jesus, it just, the closer I look, the more I learn about it. I just don't know that we are equipped to do anything other than kind of, what we're doing now, which is, I don't know, it's like, kind of feels like ventilators during COVID. You know what I mean? It's like we thought that was the answer, and then we figured out that it wasn't the answer, and man, it's fucking hard.
But I think it is a bigger discussion, and I think to have those discussions, there's so much value in that. And even with that interesting point that you just brought up about do not resuscitate, I think that's a question for us to explore further down the road here, and to bring in some people to talk about that too, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying. Dr. Main, who works here in Kelowna, incredibly intelligent, charismatic, experienced, educated. This guy is front lines. He is progressive. He really cares. He's doing his best, and he's gonna try. He's very busy, but he's gonna try to make some time here to come on the show. And I'm very interested in hearing from him and getting his perspective on this. I like asking the question, if you were given complete control of the situation, you were like a despotic leader, what kind of, strategies would you use to deal with this? And what do you see in that's working? What do you see in that's not? What's the problem? What are we doing wrong? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But if nothing else, it's an interesting, complex problem that is very important to make people aware of. So
big time.
That's one thing we can do, I guess.
Yep.
Did you have anything else from those that you wanted to?
No, I don't think so. I think they were really great. I think they added value to the conversation. It added a voice, at least for our platform, because I know we're not the first people to do this, or other podcasts that have done that, and some YouTube channels that have done it really, really well. But I think for our specific discussion, it added a lot of value there. So I appreciate you doing it, because it was kind of uncharted territory for us, and you nailed it. So
yeah, thanks, man. It was definitely a challenge, but a worthy challenge, I think. Yeah. So. All right, we will leave it there, and we'll probably do some more of those in the future, and ponder the questions that we talked about today, and hopefully get some more guests here soon.
Yeah, look forward to it.
All right, buddy. We will talk to you soon, and we'll talk to everybody out there soon as well. Bye, everyone.
Yep, see you soon.